The wind howled through the tall, dark trees that surrounded the little cottage at the edge of the forest. Snow fell in thick, soft flakes, piling on the roof, and making the world outside look silent and empty. Inside, a small fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The woman who lived there sat in front of it, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She was used to the quiet. She liked it that way. Her name was Alara, though most people in the village had long forgotten it. To them, she was simply the healer who lives at the edge of the woods. She had been alone for many years, ever since the old wounds of her past had driven her from the village and the people she once knew. She had chosen a life of solitude, tending her herbs, healing injuries, and speaking only when it was necessary. People feared the forest and the shadows it held, and she was glad for their caution. Alara's days were simple. She rose with the sun, gathered what she needed from the forest, and worked quietly in her small garden of herbs. She brewed teas, made salves, and healed minor wounds for travelers who dared venture close. Though she helped them, she never lingered. She had long ago learned that the world was not kind to people like her, to those who carried both knowledge and sorrow in equal measure. That night, however, the storm had changed everything. The wind had picked up, rattling the wooden shutters and making the fire dance wildly in the hearth. Alara stirred her tea, her eyes scanning the dark shapes of the trees beyond her window. There was something in the storm tonight that made her uneasy, a feeling she could not shake. She turned back to the fire, thinking she imagined it. Then came the knock. A heavy, urgent knock at her door. Alara froze. She was not used to visitors, and certainly not in the middle of a storm. The knock came again, louder this time, almost demanding entrance. Her heart pounded in her chest. She moved cautiously toward the door, placing her hand on the wooden latch. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there in the driving snow was a man unlike any she had ever seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clothed in furs that were wet and matted from the storm. His hair was dark, streaked with silver, and his eyes, silver and glowing faintly in the dim light, seemed to pierce straight through her. There was something wild about him, something that made the hair on her arms rise. "I need shelter," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "Please, I have nowhere else to go tonight." Alara hesitated. Fear and caution warred with the small spark of compassion she still carried inside her. This man was not like any traveler she had ever met. There was power in him, raw and dangerous, but also a vulnerability she could not ignore. "Come in," she said at last, stepping aside. "But stay by the fire." He entered without another word, his presence filling the small room with an energy that made her chest tighten. He looked around quickly, noting the herbs, the books, and the small comforts of her home. Then he removed his wet cloak and sat on the edge of a wooden chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am grateful," he said quietly, though there was a strength behind his words. "You do not know how dangerous it is for me to be seen out here tonight." Alara nodded slowly. "I know some things," she said carefully. "I know the forest is not kind. I know the storms can hide more than snow. You are not safe here, but you are safe for now." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand why she spoke with such calm authority. Then, almost imperceptibly, he relaxed. "My name is Kale," he said. "I am a king, a Lycan king." Alara's eyes widened slightly. A Lycan king. She had heard the stories, the legends whispered in the village, tales of men who could shift into beasts, feared and hunted for centuries, but she did not show fear. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. "Then you are far from your court," she said softly, "and far from your people." Kale nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "I am hunted," he said, "by those who would see my kind destroyed, by those who would see me dead." Alara studied him in silence. There was truth in his eyes. She could see the weight of centuries, the loneliness, and the constant vigilance it required. She had lived alone for years, And in that moment, she felt a strange kinship with this man, who carried a crown heavier than any stone. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair near the fire. "You need warmth. You need rest. And perhaps a moment to trust another human being." Kale hesitated but obeyed. As he sat, the firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his features and the silver glint in his eyes. Alara felt her pulse quicken. There was something magnetic about him, something that made the air between them tense, yet filled with unspoken understanding. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but inside the little cottage, there was only the sound of the fire and the quiet breathing of two solitary beings who had found each other in the vast loneliness of the world. Finally, Kael spoke, his voice low and rough. "Why do you help me? Why risk yourself?" Alara met his gaze evenly. "Because I know what it is to be hunted. Because I know what it is to be alone. And sometimes, one act of kindness is all it takes to change a life." Alara. 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 There was silence after that. Kael's expression softened. And for the first time, Alara saw the man behind the beast, the vulnerability beneath the king. She felt a stirring in her heart, a flicker of emotion she had long buried under years of solitude. As the night deepened, the wind outside seemed to grow louder, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Shadows moved in the forest, and the faint howl of wolves echoed in the distance. Kael rose from his chair and moved to the window, his expression hardening. "They are close," he said. "The hunters. They will not stop until I am dead." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had known danger in the forest before, but never like this. The weight of it pressed against her. And yet, she did not retreat. She stood beside him, her hand lightly touching his arm, a silent promise that she would not let him face it alone. Kael looked at her then, and for a moment, the storm and the fear seemed to disappear. He saw in her eyes courage and strength, and perhaps something else. A bond that neither time nor fear could break. "You should rest," Alara said softly. "The storm is long, and the night is dangerous. But I will keep watch." Kael nodded, though his gaze lingered on her. He could feel the strange pull between them, the tension, and curiosity, the unspoken understanding that something powerful had begun tonight, something neither of them fully understood. Alara returned to her seat by the fire, but she could not stop thinking about him, about his eyes, his presence, the weight of the life he carried. She had chosen solitude for so long. Yet here was a man who challenged that choice, who brought danger and uncertainty into her carefully ordered life. And as the storm raged on outside, she knew deep in her heart that her life would never be the same. The night stretched on, and with it came a quiet understanding. The Lycan King was not just a stranger seeking shelter. He was a force that would test her courage, her heart, and the very limits of her solitude. And in the darkness, beneath the falling snow, she realized that something ancient and powerful had knocked on her door, and that once it had, nothing could go back to the way it had been. And then, just before dawn, Kael whispered something that made her heart skip. "They are coming. And if you shelter me, you may not survive the night." Alara's hands tightened around her mug. She looked at him, and despite the fear in her chest, she made a choice. She would not turn him away. Whatever storm was coming, whatever danger awaited, she would face it. For the first time in years, she felt alive in the company of another soul, even one as dangerous and magnificent as the Lycan King. And outside, the storm howled louder, as if the world itself had sensed the beginning of something unstoppable. The storm had passed, leaving the forest in a hush of frost and cold mist. Sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy of trees, casting silver shadows across the snow-covered ground. Inside her cottage, Alara moved quietly, tending the fire and preparing a simple breakfast. She could hear the soft breathing of Kael, the Lycan King, resting in the corner wrapped in a heavy blanket. Even in sleep, he seemed different from any man she had known, powerful, alert, yet somehow fragile. His brow furrowed as if haunted by memories she could not see. Alara felt a strange mixture of awe and caution. She had lived alone for years, relying on silence and solitude to protect herself. And yet here was a man who had entered her life like a storm, breaking down walls she had built long ago. She set a bowl of warm broth in front of him. "Eat," she said softly. "You need your strength." Kale opened his eyes slowly, silver light shimmering faintly in them. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he nodded and took the bowl. "You are kind," he said, his voice low but steady. "I am not used to kindness." Alara shrugged lightly. "Kindness is simple," she said. "It does not require titles or power. Only choice." Clued. He studied her words, as if weighing them carefully. The air between them carried an unspoken understanding, a fragile thread forming in the quiet warmth of her home. Yet outside, the forest whispered warnings. Danger was near. The hunters who pursued Kael would not rest, and the shadows moved with purpose, stretching through the trees like tendrils of ice. Over the next few days, Kael began to recover. His wounds healed slowly. Aided by Alara's skill with herbs and salves, she observed him closely, noting the way he carried himself, even when weak, the careful control of his body, the tension in his hands, and the way his eyes scanned the forest as if he could hear threats the world could not see. In return, Kael watched her. He admired her quiet courage, the way she managed the small world of her home with precision and care. Unlike many he had known, she did not fear him, nor did she flinch at the sight of his power. That intrigued him more than anything else. He had spent lifetimes hiding from humans. Yet here was one who saw him clearly, without terror. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Kael approached the fire while Alara stirred a pot of tea. The warmth from the flames reflected in his eyes, making them glow like molten silver. "You are different from those in my court," he said. "They bow and fear me. You do neither. Why?" Alara paused, her hand on the handle of her teapot. "I do not bow to fear," she said simply, "and I do not fear what I do not understand. I have learned that fear makes people weak, and I refuse to be weak." Kael regarded her silently. He was not used to such defiance, nor such calm strength. Most he met either cowered or challenged him recklessly. Alara was neither. She was a force, quiet and steady, a presence he had not realized he craved. "Perhaps," he said finally, "that is why I came here. Perhaps fate has a strange sense of timing." Alara did not answer immediately. Instead, she poured the tea and handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected spark through her chest. She looked down quickly, hiding the sudden warmth that spread through her body. Days passed, and Kael shared fragments of his story. His people had once ruled the northern forests for centuries, living in balance with the land. But a curse had been cast upon them long ago, twisting their lineage and marking them as targets for hunters who feared their power. He had become king at a young age, carrying responsibilities no human could understand, and now hunted relentlessly by those who wished to see his kind extinct. Alara listened in silence, absorbing every word. She understood isolation, loss, and the weight of unseen battles. Though her struggles were of a different kind, she did not pity him, but she felt empathy for the life he had endured. One night, as moonlight spilled across the forest, Kael stood at her window. His eyes scanned the dark trees, alert and tense. "They are closer," he whispered. "I can feel them." Alara approached, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Then we prepare," she said. "I will not let them take you. Not here, not under my watch." Kael's gaze softened for a moment. No one had spoken to him like that in decades. Not with such quiet courage and certainty. And yet, the tension between them remained an unspoken pull, a balance of trust and wariness that neither dared break. Over the next few days, Alara taught Kael about the hidden paths in the forest, where hunters would find only silence and shadows. She showed him the herbs that could heal or protect, the rituals that could mask his scent from mortal eyes, and the wards she had placed around her home. In return, Kale shared with her lessons in survival, strength, and vigilance. Though his teaching was rough, it carried the weight of centuries of experience. As they worked together, a fragile trust began to form. They were two solitary souls bound by circumstance, learning to rely on one another in ways neither had expected. Yet the bond was uneasy, threaded with tension. Every glance, every touch, held the potential for danger or desire. One evening, after a long day of preparation, they sat together by the fire. The warmth was comforting, but the silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Kale spoke first. "You have chosen to protect me," he said quietly. "Though you do not know what will come, or what I truly am. Why do you stay?" Ilara met his gaze steadily. "Because I know what it is to be hunted. Because I understand fear and loneliness. And because I choose to." Kale's eyes lingered on her, studying her face, the determination in her eyes, the faint lines of a life hardened by solitude. He wanted to trust her completely, to lean into the strange connection that had formed between them. But the hunters waited outside. The shadows would not forgive kindness. Then, in the quiet, a sound came from the forest, a snap of a branch, deliberate and sharp. Both froze. Kale's senses sharpened instantly. He rose, his body tense, his ears twitching as he listened to the night. "They are close," he whispered, his voice tight with warning. "Too close." Ilara's heart pounded, but she did not step back. She felt the same mixture of fear and resolve she always carried in her solitude. "Then we face them," she said firmly. "Together." Kale turned to her, and in that moment, the connection between them became undeniable. Two people who had lived apart, guarded by walls and silence, now stood side by side, bound by trust and necessity. The storm outside had passed, but another storm was coming, one that would test them both, body and soul. They prepared the house, placing wards and barriers, readying what few weapons they had. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath, and the snow glistened in the pale light of the moon. Every sound, every shadow, carried the weight of imminent danger. Hours passed in tense silence. Kale remained near the window, alert, while Ilara checked the wards and whispered protective words over the cottage. Despite the fear, a strange warmth lingered between them. They were learning to rely on each other, to share the quiet courage that solitude had once demanded of them alone. Then, without warning, a low growl came from the edge of the forest. The snow shifted, and figures moved through the trees. Hunters, clad in dark furs, eyes sharp with intent. They had come for Kale. Kale's body tensed. "Stay inside," he commanded, though his gaze never left hers. "Do not come near the door." Ilara nodded, but her hands shook slightly. She would not leave him. Not now. Not ever. She had made her choice. The hunters drew closer, and the forest seemed to darken unnaturally, as if the shadows themselves had awakened. Kale moved to the door, ready to confront them, but paused, looking back at her. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice low and steady, "do not run. Trust yourself. Trust me." Ilara swallowed hard. "I trust you," she whispered, though the fear in her chest was real. And then, with a howl that echoed through the forest, the first hunter stepped into the clearing. Kale's eyes glowed silver, and the air around him seemed to hum with power. The night had changed, and nothing would ever be the same. The moon hung low over the forest, pale and cold, casting silver light across the snow. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint howls that seemed to echo from the shadows themselves. Inside the cottage, the fire burned low, flickering across the walls as Ilara worked quietly, preparing salves and herbs. Kale sat near the window, his eyes scanning the dark forest beyond, alert for any sign of the hunters who pursued him. He had grown restless these past days, pacing the room, occasionally glancing at her with a strange intensity she could not decipher. There was something in his gaze tonight. Something more than caution. Something heavy with history, sorrow, and fear. "Elara," he said finally, his voice low. "There is something I must tell you. Something you need to understand, if you are to stay here safely with me." She looked up, her hands stilling over the small jars she was arranging. "I am listening," she said softly. Cale's eyes darkened. He drew a deep breath, as if preparing to release centuries of pain all at once. "I am bound by a curse," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "A curse that has haunted my family for generations. It marked my bloodline, twisting us into beings both man and beast, hunted and feared by all. I am the last to bear it fully, the king and the guardian of what remains." Elara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she did not step back. She had heard whispers of such curses, legends told in the village about men who could shift into beasts and kings whose power terrified both humans and creatures of the forest. But hearing it from him, looking into his silver eyes, made it real in a way that filled the room with tension and weight. "Why tell me now?" she asked gently. "Why not keep it hidden?" "Because you must understand the danger," Cale replied. "The hunters, the rivals, they are not only after my life, they would see anyone who shelters me destroyed. And more than that, this curse is not something I can fight alone. It demands trust. It demands sacrifice. And it demands human courage." Elara's heart pounded. She had faced fear many times in the forest, healed wounds both physical and invisible, but never had a threat carried such weight. And yet, a strange pull drew her closer to him, a curiosity mingled with empathy. She understood loneliness. She understood danger. And perhaps, unknowingly, she understood a kind of courage that reached beyond survival. "I am not afraid," she said firmly. "I will help you, Cale. Whatever it takes." He studied her for a long moment, silver eyes glimmering with something unreadable. There was surprise, relief, and a shadow of doubt. "You do not know what it will demand," he said quietly. "You do not know the power you are inviting into your life." Elara nodded. "I know. And I accept it. I will not turn away from what must be done." For the first time in weeks, Cale's expression softened. He looked at her. Really looked. And saw not a healer. Not a woman hiding from the world. But someone fierce and unyielding. Someone capable of standing beside a king, of standing beside him. The next days were filled with preparation. Elara studied ancient texts, learned rituals and wards that could help mask Cale's presence from mortal hunters, and practiced spells of protection. Cale trained silently, demonstrating strength, agility, and senses beyond human comprehension. The cottage became a place of strange energy, charged with tension and unspoken emotion. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Cale spoke of the weight of leadership, of centuries spent hiding, and of the loneliness that came with being both feared and worshipped. Elara shared fragments of her own story, her years of solitude, and the quiet pain that had driven her away from the village. In those moments, a subtle bond began to form. It was a mixture of respect, trust, and attention neither could ignore. Every glance, every touch, carried weight. They were two people who had survived the world alone, now learning that survival meant relying on someone else and perhaps, unexpectedly, caring for them. One night, as the forest lay silent under a blanket of snow, Cale moved to the window and looked out at the shadows. "They are closer," he murmured. "I can feel it in the air. The hunters will not wait. They will strike at the first opportunity." Elara stepped beside him, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Then, we prepare," she said softly. "We will face them together." Cale turned to her, and for a moment, vulnerability flickered across his face. "You risk yourself for me," he said. "You do not know what may happen, yet you choose to stay." "I know fear," she replied. "I know danger. But I also know courage. And I choose courage tonight. I choose to stand with you." Cale's eyes softened, and he nodded. The storm outside was gone, But a storm of a different kind had taken root in the room, the storm of trust, tension, and unspoken longing. That night, the forest stirred. Shadows moved in unnatural patterns, and the snow seemed to shift as if alive. A low growl echoed from the trees, sending a chill through the air. Kale rose, his senses alert, his body coiled like a predator. "They are here," he whispered, his voice steady but tense. Alara did not move away. She stayed by his side, her hands steady despite the fear that coursed through her. She had made her choice. They would face whatever came together. The first shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing, a dark figure, moving with silent precision. Kale's eyes glowed silver as he stepped forward, muscles tense, ready to confront the threat. Ilara whispered protective words over the cottage, her voice firm, steady, filled with intent. The wards she had placed began to glow faintly, shimmering in the cold moonlight. As more hunters emerged, Kyle moved with controlled power, positioning himself to defend the cottage and the woman who had chosen to stand with him. He was a force of nature, commanding the space around him. And yet every movement was precise, careful, as if he sought to protect rather than harm unnecessarily. Alara watched, a mixture of awe and fear gripping her heart. She had always been strong in her own way, but she had never faced such raw power so close. And yet, she felt a strange reassurance in his presence, a sense that together, they could endure anything. The hunters hesitated at the edge of the wards, sensing the power that pulsed through the cottage. Kale's silver eyes scanned them, unyielding, and the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with his strength and the lingering magic of the protections Alara had placed. Suddenly, a howl split the night, sharp and commanding. Kyle turned, ears twitching, senses stretching to the farthest edges of the forest. "They are testing us," he said, voice low. "They will not strike yet, but they will not leave. We must be ready." Ilara's hand brushed against his arm, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. Their eyes met, and she saw in his gaze something she had never expected: gratitude, trust, and a hint of something deeper, something that went beyond fear or survival. "Whatever comes," she said softly, "we face it together." Kale nodded, and a rare, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. For centuries, he had known only solitude and caution. For centuries, he had been hunted and feared. But here, in the quiet warmth of a small cottage on the edge of the forest, he had found someone willing to stand beside him. Someone who could see beyond the beast, beyond the king, to the man within. The night stretched on, and the tension between them grew. Quiet, but undeniable. Every sound, every shadow, carried potential danger. And yet, beneath it all, a bond had begun to form, a bond forged in trust, courage, and the unspoken pull of hearts that had long been lonely. Then, as the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, a shadow moved closer, and a single figure stepped into the clearing. The hunters had returned, bolder now, ready to strike. Kale's eyes glowed with silver fire, and Alara felt the weight of the night pressing down upon them. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had chosen this path. She had chosen him. And whatever happened next, they would face it together. And in the stillness of the morning, Kale whispered something that made her heart tighten. "Stay close to me, Alara. The curse is stronger than you know, and it will test everything we have." The forest was quiet, unnaturally quiet, as the first rays of dawn cut through the frost-covered trees. Snow glistened like silver under the pale sunlight, and the wind carried only faint whispers, as if even nature held its breath. Alara stood at the edge of her clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. Beside her, Kael, the Lycan king, moved like a shadow, poised and alert, his silver eyes scanning the distant tree line. The hunters had not yet given up. Kael knew it. He could feel it in the tension that pulsed through the cold air, in the subtle shifts of the snow, in the silence of the forest. But this time, they would not catch him unprepared. Not with Alara by his side. "Alara," he said, his voice low but steady. "Whatever happens now, we do it together. There is no turning back. The curse, the hunters, it all ends today." She nodded, gripping her staff tightly, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I am ready," she said firmly. "We face it as one." Kale studied her for a moment, a flicker of admiration and something deeper in his gaze. He had walked through centuries of danger and betrayal, had known countless allies who failed or turned away, and yet here stood a woman who was not afraid, who met his power and darkness with courage and clarity. The forest suddenly stirred. Shadows shifted unnaturally among the trees, moving toward them with purpose. The hunters had arrived, and behind them came a more ancient presence, a dark, lingering energy that hinted at the origin of Kale's curse. "They are testing us," Kale whispered. "The curse itself. It wants to see if I am ready, if we are ready." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. But she did not step back. Instead, she tightened her grip on the herbs and wards she carried. "Then we show it strength," she said quietly. "We show it courage." As the first of the hunters stepped into the clearing, Kale moved with unmatched speed, his movements precise and controlled. He blocked and evaded, protecting Alara while subtly guiding her to the safest spots. Her hands moved quickly, chanting protective wards and throwing pouches of herbs that released blinding sparks of light. The battle was tense but measured. Kale's power was immense, yet he never let it overwhelm her. Instead, he taught her, guided her, allowed her to take small but meaningful actions to defend herself and contribute. Their synergy grew with each passing moment, a silent understanding forming between them, born of trust and shared danger. Through the struggle, Kyle revealed the depth of his curse. "It is tied to my blood," he explained, his voice low even amid the chaos. "The sorceress who cast it centuries ago bound me to shadow and fear. Only one act of true trust and courage can break it, a bond between Lycan and human that is chosen, not forced." Alara understood. She had already chosen him. Her decision had not been about fear or survival. It was about courage, loyalty, and something deeper, something unspoken that bound her to him. As the hunters faltered under their combined strength, a darker figure emerged from the edge of the forest. The shadow of the ancient curse had manifested in a form both terrifying and majestic, a being of darkness and twisted light, moving with supernatural grace. Its eyes burned with a cold fire, and its presence made the air itself vibrate. Kale stepped forward, silver eyes glowing, and Alara moved beside him. "Together," he said, and she nodded. The battle with the curse was not of strength alone. It was a test of heart, of trust, of the bond they had forged. The dark presence lashed at Kale with shadowy tendrils, but Alara's hands glowed with protective magic. She placed her palms on his shoulders, her voice steady as she chanted the words of the ancient ritual she had studied. Their energies merged, human courage meeting Lycan strength, creating a force that even the curse could not ignore. Kale felt a warmth he had never known. For centuries, he had borne the weight of the curse alone, feared and hunted, trapped between man and beast. And now, standing beside Alara, feeling her trust and determination, the curse began to weaken. Shadows that had been a part of him for lifetimes trembled and fell away, dissolving into the morning light. Alara gasped as the darkness fled, but she held firm. "Keep going, Kale," she whispered. "Trust me. Trust us." The final surge of energy broke the curse. Kale's body shivered, silver light flashing from his eyes. And then he collapsed, exhausted, but free. The hunters, seeing the sudden transformation, faltered and fled, their fear of him amplified by the disappearance of the ancient darkness. The forest seemed to sigh, the snow sparkling like diamonds under the renewed sunlight, the shadows retreating. Alara rushed to Kale's side. "Are you all right?" she asked, worry in her voice. He opened his eyes slowly. The silver glow softened, replaced by a warmth he had not felt in centuries. He looked at her, and a rare, genuine smile touched his lips. "I am," he said, his voice gentle. "Because of you. Because we faced it together." They stood together in the quiet aftermath. The forest around them peaceful for the first time in generations. Cale reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from Alara's face. His touch was careful, respectful, yet charged with emotion. "You have given me more than freedom," he said softly. "You have given me trust, courage, and something I thought was lost to me forever." Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "We found it together," she replied. "You are not alone anymore, Cale. Not unless you choose to be." He studied her, silver eyes reflecting sunlight, and the faint glimmer of lingering magic. "I choose to stand with you," he said, stepping closer. "I choose to share what I am with you, fully and without fear." For the first time, they did not hide from one another, did not measure distance or strength. The barriers built by years of solitude and fear fell away, leaving two hearts open to trust, hope, and the quiet, unspoken bond that had formed between them. The forest around them seemed to acknowledge the transformation. Birds sang softly from the treetops, the snow glimmered like crystal, and even the wind carried a gentle warmth. Cale extended his hand, and Alara took it without hesitation. Together, they walked to the edge of her clearing, side by side, no longer king and healer, predator and human, but partners in every sense of the word. "You will have to return to your kingdom," Alara said quietly. "But you do not have to face it alone." "Not anymore." Cale nodded. "I will not," he said. "And neither will you. Wherever we go, we face it together. The curse is broken, but the world remains, and we will remain stronger than the shadows it casts." As they looked back toward the forest, the sun climbed higher, scattering the last of the shadows. The hunters were gone. The curse was gone. And in the quiet, Alara realized that the life she had thought empty and solitary was now full of possibility. She was no longer alone, not while he stood beside her. A king freed of darkness, yet bound to her by choice, courage, and trust. Cale turned to her, his eyes soft and filled with gratitude. "Alara, thank you for trusting me, for standing with me, for being you." She smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "And thank you, Cale, for trusting me, for letting me help you, for letting me be a part of something bigger than myself." For a long moment, they simply stood there, hand in hand, gazing at the forest, the snow, the sunlight. The storm had passed, the curse had ended, and two hearts, once lonely and wary, had found one another in the quiet strength of trust, courage, and unspoken love. Cale leaned slightly closer, his forehead resting against hers. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. "We have survived the curse. But the world is wide, and there is much we must face." "Together," Alara nodded, her heart steady. "Together," she echoed. And for the first time in years, she felt a peace deeper than solitude, deeper than the quiet of her little cottage. A peace born of connection, trust, and the courage to open her heart. And as the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the promise of new beginnings, the Lycan king and the healer stepped forward, side by side, into a future they would face together. A future no longer shadowed by fear, but illuminated by trust, strength, and the quiet magic of two hearts bound by choice and courage.